South Korea. South Korea is not a big country on the map, but it punches far above its weight. Around 52 million people live here, packed into a very modern, very dense society. Its economy makes around $1.8 to $1.9 trillion, powered by phones, chips, cars, batteries, and ships that the whole world buys. On the military side, most 2025 rankings put South Korea inside the top 5 militaries on Earth, even though we're putting it at number 9 on this overall power list. It keeps roughly 500,000 active troops and more than 3 million reservists because every young man has to serve. The country spends around $45 billion a year on defense, about 2.6% of its GDP, and keeps strong air defenses, modern tanks, powerful K2 Black Panther armor, and some of the most advanced destroyers and submarines in Asia. In gold, South Korea holds about 104 tons in its central bank. That is small compared to giants like the US or Germany, but it sits on top of huge foreign currency reserves and is one of the world's main exporting countries. For people who live in Seoul or Busan, power is not just about missiles aimed at the north. It is about keeping a normal life going under constant threat. Schools open, K-pop concerts full, factories running. South Korea's real strength is a highly educated population, ultra-modern industry, and a society that has learned how to live with danger without letting it control every day. That human side is why so many military watchers keep moving Korea higher in their rankings every year. France. France is one of those countries many people think they already understand, but in 2025, it is still one of the few nations that can send ships and planes almost anywhere in the world. It has around 68 million people and a $3.3 to $3.4 trillion economy, putting it in the top group of rich nations. French companies build rockets, fighter jets, missiles, and nuclear reactors, so a lot of its high-end weapons are made at home. Militarily, France sits firmly in the top 10 global forces. It fields about 260,000 active personnel, plus reserves and the powerful gendarmerie. The 2025 defense budget is around $50 to $60 billion, a bit over 2% of GDP, and Paris has already promised to push that higher before 2030. France has one nuclear-powered aircraft carrier, Charles de Gaulle, and is planning a much bigger next-generation carrier for the late 2030s. It also keeps troops and bases in places like the Middle East and Africa, which lets it react quickly far from home. On the financial side, France holds about 2,437 tons of gold, one of the largest gold piles in the world, close to what Italy and China have, and only behind the US and Germany. For French citizens, though, power is also about something softer. A strong welfare state, public health care, and a high standard of living. Many people there worry more about jobs, pensions, and the cost of life than about tank counts. So when you see France on a list like this, it's not just old empire nostalgia. It is a nuclear power with a navy that can sail and fight far from home waters, a huge gold reserve, a big modern economy, and a long habit of acting overseas, all backed by millions of people who mostly hope those weapons are never used. Japan. Japan is the country that proves you don't have to be huge to be powerful. It has about 123 million people and a very advanced economy worth a little over $4.2 to $4.3 trillion in 2025, putting it in the top 4 economies on Earth. Its strength comes from high-tech industries, cars, electronics, robotics, machine tools, shipbuilding, and batteries that the whole world depends on. Even though the population is aging and growth is slow, Japan still sits near the top of global GDP tables and remains a key investor all across Asia, Europe, and the Americas. On the military side, Japan is officially called the Self-Defense Forces, but the word self can be misleading. In the 2025 Global Firepower ranking, Japan is 8th out of 145 countries, clearly inside the top 10 militaries in the world. Tokyo is now raising defense spending to the mid-50 billion range and pushing toward about $70 billion and 2% of GDP over the next few years, its biggest buildup since World War II. The Navy runs powerful destroyers and submarines and is converting 2 large helicopter carriers so they can launch F-35B stealth fighters, which basically turns them into small aircraft carriers. Japan also invests heavily in missiles, cyber defense, and a new fighter jet program with the UK and Italy. Japan's central bank holds about 840 to 850 tons of gold, putting it in the global top 10 for official gold reserves. But if you ask many Japanese people what they are proud of, they won't start with weapons. They will talk about safety, trains that run on time, clean cities, and a culture that mixes anime, technology, and centuries of tradition. Japan's real power is this mix: a huge economy, a serious but carefully limited military, and a society that quietly holds a very important corner of the Indo-Pacific together. Germany. Germany doesn't shout about power, but in 2025 it is the largest economy in Europe and one of the biggest in the world. Its nominal GDP is now around $5 trillion, which puts it roughly in third place globally, just behind the United States and China. This money comes from cars, machinery, chemicals, green technology, and a huge export sector. When German factories slow down, you feel it in supply chains from Brazil to China. Militarily, Germany has spent many years doing more business than fighting, but that is changing fast. In the 2025 Global Firepower list, Germany sits around 14th out of 145 countries, a solid top 15 force. Berlin has approved a historic rearmament plan, about 62 to 86 billion euros for defense in 2025, and a roadmap to more than double that by 2029, bringing total planned military spending to hundreds of billions over 5 years. The goal is to rebuild its army, upgrade tanks and air defenses, buy new F-35 jets, and turn the Bundeswehr back into a fully ready NATO force after years of cuts. On top of that, Germany quietly holds the second largest gold reserves on the planet, about 3,350 tons, stored in Frankfurt, New York, and a few other locations. That gold, plus its industrial base and role as the center of the European Union, gives Germany a lot of hidden weight in global finance and politics. For ordinary Germans, though, the conversation is often less about tanks and more about stability, energy prices, jobs in car plants, and how to balance higher defense spending with social programs. That mix of economic muscle, huge gold reserves, deep alliances, and a renewed push to fix its armed forces is what keeps Germany this high on the 2025 power list, and why many experts think it will quietly become even more important over the next decade. United Kingdom. The United Kingdom doesn't look huge on a map, and its army isn't the biggest. But when you add everything together, money, military tech, nuclear weapons, and global influence, it still lands in the top 5. The UK runs a roughly $3.8 to $4 trillion economy, with London acting as one of the main financial hubs of the whole planet. Big banks, insurance giants, and energy and tech companies all move money through the city every single day. On the military side, the UK spends around $80 billion a year on defense and usually sits in the top 6 militaries in most global rankings. It has 2 large aircraft carriers, HMS Queen Elizabeth and HMS Prince of Wales, which carry F-35 stealth fighters and give Britain the ability to send carrier groups from the Atlantic all the way to the Indo-Pacific. Its professional forces are smaller than in the past, but they're well-trained, highly networked with NATO, and backed by strong intelligence and cyber capabilities. The UK is also a nuclear power, with a few hundred warheads carried on ballistic missile submarines that rarely appear in public but are always part of the picture. Add more than 300 tons of official gold reserves and deep alliances like NATO, AUKUS, and the close link with the United States, and you get a country that punches far above its size. People in the UK argue all the time about whether money should go to hospitals or to defense, but in 2025, the combination of hard power and global influence still keeps Britain near the top of any power list. India. India is a giant that many people still underestimate. In 2025, it has passed the $4 trillion mark and become the world's 4th largest economy, growing faster than almost every other big country. A population of more than 1.4 billion people, most of them young, means a huge labor force, a massive home market, and millions of engineers, coders, and entrepreneurs. On defense, India now spends roughly the $75 to $85 billion range each year, and that number keeps creeping upward as the economy grows. It fields one of the largest armies on Earth, with well over 1 million active soldiers, thousands of tanks and artillery pieces, and a big air force flying everything from Sukhoi and Rafale fighters to homegrown Tejas jets. And yes, online you'll still find Pakistanis and Indians turning the last clash into a 7-0 scoreboard meme, complete with Trump hand gestures.
They already shot down 7 jets. That was raging.
But even if you treat it like a football joke, that's one night, not the whole league. India is still building a very large, very serious air force. At sea, India operates 2 aircraft carriers, INS Vikramaditya and INS Vikrant, and its navy talks openly about a 3rd carrier in the future, a clear sign that India plans to control its surrounding seas for the long term. India is also a nuclear power with long-range missiles, a growing fleet of nuclear-powered submarines, and its own space and satellite programs. At the same time, many Indians say they don't want war. They want jobs, better schools, and development. That tension is part of India's story, a country that has to stay strong in a tough neighborhood, but where every extra rupee for defense is also a rupee people wish could be spent on lifting more families out of poverty. With fast growth, rising tech power, huge gold reserves, and a very active role in global diplomacy, India clearly belongs in the top tier of world powers in 2025. Russia. Russia is still one of the most argued about countries whenever people talk about global power. On paper, it is a classic military giant. Around $145 to $150 billion in defense spending in 2024, roughly 6 to 7% of its whole economy, which is a massive share for a country with a GDP a bit over $2 trillion. It has one of the world's biggest nuclear arsenals, thousands of tanks and artillery pieces, long-range bombers, and powerful air defense systems like the S-400. But raw numbers never tell the full story. What really matters is what survives real war. Since 2022, Russia has paid a very high price in Ukraine. Western and Ukrainian sources estimate that Russia has lost many thousands of tanks and armored vehicles, plus hundreds of aircraft, and over 1 million soldiers killed or wounded. So a natural question is, how can Russia still be seen as number 2 or 3 in military strength? The answer is that Russia is turning more and more into a war economy. Factories run day and night building shells, drones, and cheap armored vehicles. At the same time, Moscow leans on huge gold reserves, more than 2,300 tons, about $300 billion worth, to cushion sanctions and fund the war. So Russia stays near the top of any power list because it still has nuclear weapons, a big army, and a government ready to sacrifice a lot for military goals. But if you read the stories of Russian deserters and the families of the dead, you can feel another side. Millions of ordinary people who would rather have jobs, roads, and a normal life than another victory on the map. China. China is the country many people now see as quietly preparing to overtake everyone. Its economy is huge. Projections put China at about $19 to $20 trillion in GDP around 2025, not far behind the United States, and it has a population of roughly 1.4 billion people. On the military side, China is now the world's second biggest spender, with an official defense budget close to $250 billion for 2025. Independent researchers say the real number, including hidden programs, is over $300 billion and has been rising for 3 decades in a row. That money builds a modern air force, long-range missiles, cyber units, and especially a navy. By ship count, China now has the largest navy on Earth, with over 370 combat ships and submarines and more coming every year, including 3 aircraft carriers, the newest one, Fujian, using the same style of launch system as the latest US carriers. China is also quietly stacking gold. Officially, it holds just over 2,300 tons, and some analysts think the real total could be double that, as Beijing slowly swaps dollars for gold and yuan. All of this makes China a country that doesn't just shape its own region, but can push the whole global system. Strong factories, huge population, big tech companies, and a military that can project force far beyond its shores, from the South China Sea to Africa. At the same time, many Chinese citizens still worry more about housing, jobs, and daily life than about hypersonic missiles. That tension between ordinary people who want stability and a state that is arming for possible conflict around Taiwan and beyond is one of the biggest questions for the next decade. United States. The United States is still the country most people use as their main point of comparison, whether they love it or hate it. Around 340 million people live there, and its economy is on track for about $30 trillion in 2025, bigger than China and any other country by a wide margin. A lot of the tools people use every day start in the US. Operating systems, social media, streaming platforms, chips, software, films, games. On top of that, the US dollar is the main currency for world trade and savings, which gives Washington a kind of invisible weapon. If it cuts you off from its financial system, your banks and imports can crash. On the military side, the US is in its own league. In 2024, it spent about $997 billion on defense, more than the next several countries combined, and over a third of all global military spending. It has the most powerful navy, with multiple carrier strike groups that can move almost anywhere on the planet. A huge air force with jets like the F-22 and F-35, advanced bombers like the B-2 and new B-21, strong special forces, and a large modern nuclear arsenal. U.S. forces are not just at home. There are hundreds of bases abroad, with roughly 750 to 800 sites in about 80 foreign countries and territories, from Germany and Japan to the Gulf and Africa. The U.S. also sits on the biggest gold reserve in the world, about 8,133 tons, which helps back confidence in its currency and bonds. But inside the country, there is another side to the story. Many Americans are proud of their veterans and high-tech weapons, but they also ask why almost $1 trillion goes to defense while healthcare, schools, and housing are still a problem. Others point out that even with all this power, the U.S. struggled in places like Vietnam and Afghanistan, which proves that wars are decided by people on the ground, not just by budgets and gadgets. So, in 2025, the United States clearly sits at number 1 when you add up money, technology, alliances, bases, nukes, and culture. But behind the rankings, there is a very human question that shows up again and again. What is the point of being this strong if ordinary people don't feel safer, richer, and more at peace? If you like this breakdown and want more videos like this, make sure to like the video, subscribe, and tell me your own ranking in the comments.